In every anxious moment, there is a truth we often forget. It is not the world that scares us, but the mind that interprets it. Two people can face the same situation. One panics, the other remains calm. The difference isn't strength, intelligence, or luck. The difference is the mind. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins the moment we lose control of our inner world, and anxiety is simply the echo of a mind that has forgotten its own power. But the Buddha also taught something profoundly liberating. The mind can be trained, reshaped, and freed. And once you understand how the mind truly works, anxiety cannot rule you anymore. Imagine waking up without the weight in your chest, without the racing thoughts, without the constant "what if" that steals your peace. Imagine a life where your thoughts don't drag you into fear, but guide you back into clarity. That transformation begins with a single Buddhist mind trick, one so simple yet so powerful that once it clicks, nothing in your life will ever control you the same way again. This is the shift that turns an anxious mind into an unshakable one. 1. Anxiety is a reaction, not your identity. You have lived with anxiety for so long that it begins to feel like a personality trait, almost as if it is woven into your character. You might even introduce yourself to the world through it, without realizing it, saying things like, "I'm anxious," "I'm a worrier," or "I overthink everything," as though these statements describe who you are at the core. But Buddhism teaches something far more powerful and freeing. Anxiety is not a part of your identity. Anxiety is simply a reaction, an automatic response produced by a mind that has forgotten how strong, capable, and resilient it truly is. When something feels uncertain, unfamiliar, or beyond your control, your mind tries to protect you by creating fear, tension, and worry. It believes these reactions will keep you safe. However, just because your mind creates the reaction doesn't mean the reaction defines you. The Buddha explains that all mental reactions arise, stay for a moment, and then fade away, just like waves forming on the surface of the ocean. The waves can be loud, powerful, and chaotic, but no matter how strong they become, they never change what the ocean is. The ocean remains deep, vast, calm, and untouched beneath the surface. In the same way, anxiety might create noise on the surface of your mind, but it never changes the deeper truth of who you are. When you begin to understand this, you stop identifying with every feeling that passes through you. You stop believing that something is wrong with you every time your chest tightens or your thoughts race. Instead of thinking, "Why am I like this?" you start to realize, this is just a mental reaction. It will pass. This shift is life-changing because the moment you stop labeling yourself with anxiety, you weaken the hold it has over you. You stop making fear your identity. You stop treating temporary emotions as permanent truths. You stop living as a prisoner of every thought and begin living as the observer who watches thoughts come and go. And in that observation, you find freedom, you find clarity, you find the space between your true self and your temporary emotions. That small space is where control returns to you. That space is where peace begins. That is the moment your healing truly starts, because you finally understand anxiety is something you experience, not something you are. And once you know that, anxiety can no longer dictate the story of your life. 2. The Buddha's sacred pause. The mind trick that breaks anxiety instantly. There is a moment right before anxiety fully takes over, a small opening, a tiny gap, a single breath of space where your entire emotional direction can change. Most people never notice this moment because anxiety rushes in so quickly, tightening the chest, speeding the heart, and overwhelming the mind with thoughts that feel urgent and dangerous. But Buddhism teaches that inside this moment lies your greatest power, the power of the sacred pause. The sacred pause is the simple but life-changing practice of stopping for just a few seconds before reacting to the fear your mind creates. Instead of getting dragged into a spiral of worry, you give your mind permission to reset. When anxiety begins to rise, your mind immediately prepares for battle. It imagines worst-case scenarios, pushes you into defensive thinking, and convinces you that something bad is about to happen, even when there is no real threat. The sacred pause interrupts this automatic chain reaction. In those few seconds, you step out of the storm before it consumes you. You are not running from the feeling, you are simply choosing not to be controlled by it. Monks use this practice every day because they understand that the mind is powerful, but it is also trainable. The moment you pause, you weaken anxiety's momentum. You prevent your thoughts from exploding into panic. You gently take back control from the emotional impulse that would normally overpower you. During this pause, you remind yourself that a thought is not a danger, a feeling is not a command, and anxiety is not a prediction. It is just a reaction. You can place your hand on your chest, take a slow breath in, and silently say, "I am here." This small acknowledgement grounds you in the present moment. It signals to your nervous system that you are safe. It tells your mind that it does not need to protect you with fear. And as soon as your mind understands that you are aware, calm, and conscious, the intensity of the fear begins to fall away. What makes the sacred pause so powerful is not the length of time, but the awareness within that time. For the first time, anxiety is not dragging you. You are observing it. You are watching your mind try to react, and by doing so, you step into a position of strength. You begin to see that fear is not something happening to you, it's something happening inside you. And once you see it clearly, it loses its ability to control you. You stop feeding it energy. You stop treating it as an emergency. You let it rise, and you let it fall, without giving it the power to shape your actions. Practicing this mind trick repeatedly trains your brain to respond with clarity instead of panic. Over time, you become less reactive, more grounded, and more emotionally strong. The sacred pause becomes your shield, the space where peace replaces fear and where control returns to your hands. This is how you begin breaking the cycle of anxiety, not by fighting your thoughts, but by learning to meet them with awareness before they take root. This pause is the first moment you reclaim your power, and the first moment the world realizes it can no longer control you. 3. What you resist persists. Accepting the moment calms the mind. One of the most exhausting parts of anxiety is the constant inner battle you fight with yourself. You feel fear rising, and immediately you tell yourself, "Stop it. I shouldn't feel like this. Why am I like this? What is wrong with me?" Without realizing it, you begin resisting your own emotions, pushing them away as though they are dangerous or unacceptable. But Buddhism teaches that the more you resist a feeling, the stronger it becomes. The more you push anxiety down, the harder it pushes back. It grows louder because you are feeding it with tension, fear, and self-judgment. This resistance traps you in a cycle where your mind becomes both the creator of the fear and the battlefield on which you try to fight it. No one wins in that kind of war. Acceptance is the opposite of resistance, and it is one of the most powerful tools for calming an anxious mind. Acceptance does not mean you like the feeling or want it to stay. It simply means you stop fighting it. You stop labeling it as wrong. You stop treating it as a threat. You acknowledge the emotion as a temporary experience your mind and body are going through. When you do this, anxiety loses the fuel that keeps it burning. It begins to soften naturally because the tension you were adding through resistance is no longer there. Acceptance creates emotional space, and in that space your breath smooths out, your thoughts slow down, and your mind begins to feel safe again. Think of anxiety like a child who is crying loudly because it wants attention. If you yell at the child, ignore it, or demand that it stop crying instantly, the child becomes even louder and more distressed. But when you gently acknowledge the child, kneel down and say, "I hear you," the crying begins to fade. This is how your mind responds when you stop resisting your feelings. Every anxious signal it sends is an attempt to get your attention, not to destroy your peace. Acceptance is how you reassure the mind, how you calm it, how you remind it that you are present and aware. Your anxiety doesn't need punishment, it needs understanding. When you allow the feeling to be there, without judgment, you also allow it to pass. You realize that the emotion was never the enemy. Your reaction to the emotion was what made it overwhelming. The moment you say, "It's okay to feel this," your nervous system relaxes. Your mind realizes nothing dangerous is happening. You stop pouring fear into the sensation, and suddenly the sensation loses its power. Buddhism teaches that when you open the door to a difficult emotion, it quietly enters and quietly leaves. But when you keep the door closed out of fear, the emotion keeps knocking, louder and louder. Acceptance teaches you that peace doesn't come from controlling every moment or suppressing every feeling. It comes from allowing life to unfold without tension. It teaches you to trust your inner strength instead of panicking over temporary discomfort. It teaches you that you don't need to run away from yourself. And once you learn this, anxiety no longer feels like a monster you must defeat. It becomes something you can face, breathe through, and move beyond. This is how acceptance transforms your life. Not by removing anxiety instantly, but by removing anxiety's control over you. 4. Anxiety comes from living. In the future, peace comes from returning to now. Anxiety is almost never about what is happening right now. It is almost always about what might happen. Your mind jumps ahead, imagining situations that haven't occurred, outcomes that may never unfold, and problems that do not exist in this moment. It projects you into a future filled with uncertainty, and because that future is unknown, your mind tries to prepare you by creating fear. This is why anxiety feels so overwhelming. It forces you to live in a world your thoughts created, not in the world that actually exists around you. Buddhism teaches that this constant mental travel into the future is the root of anxious suffering. The future is not real, it is only a possibility. But your mind treats it like a threat, and your body responds as if danger is already here. When you bring your awareness back to the present moment, something powerful happens. The fear begins to dissolve, because anxiety cannot survive in the present. The present moment is simple, clear, and grounded. It is just a breath, a sound, a feeling, a sensation. There is no danger in the present. There is only experience. The Buddha taught that the present moment is the only place where peace exists and the only place where your mind can truly rest. When you focus on what is actually happening instead of what could happen, you take back control from the imaginary future that was draining your energy and overwhelming your thoughts. Think about how often your anxiety begins with sentences like, "What if? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not good enough?" These questions pull you into a future that hasn't occurred. You begin fighting problems that do not exist, preparing for pain that hasn't happened, and carrying burdens that aren't yours. The mind does this because it wants certainty, but certainty doesn't exist in the future. It exists only in the present. When you return to the now, you remind your mind that this moment is safe, that this breath is enough, that this second is real and manageable. The body relaxes, the heart slows, and the mind realizes it does not need to panic. Returning to the present isn't something you force. It is something you allow. You can bring your attention to your breath, feeling the air enter and leave your body. You can feel your feet on the ground, your hands resting, the sounds around you, the temperature of the room. These small sensory connections anchor you in reality, pulling you out of the chaotic world your thoughts were inventing. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Over time, your mind learns that staying in the present is safe, calm, and peaceful. It stops running ahead, because it understands that the future is not your responsibility, the present is. This shift transforms your relationship with anxiety. You begin to see that fear was never coming from the events of your life. It was coming from the stories your mind was telling about what could happen. When you return to the now, you cut off the fuel that anxiety depends on. You stop feeding your fear with imaginary scenarios and start nourishing your peace with reality. You discover that the present moment is enough. Enough to calm you, enough to guide you, enough to protect you. Once you learn to live here, anxiety no longer has a place to grow. The future loses its power over you. You stop feeling controlled by uncertainty and start feeling grounded in the truth of what is directly in front of you. This is where peace begins. This is where freedom is found. Woo. The mind creates suffering by telling stories that aren't true. One of the greatest reasons anxiety feels so powerful is because your mind does not simply react to life, it creates stories about life, and you believe those stories as if they are absolute truth. The human mind has a natural habit. When something feels uncertain, it fills the empty space with imagination. It starts predicting outcomes, assuming meanings, inventing dangers, and building scenarios that do not exist outside your thoughts. What begins as a simple feeling of discomfort quickly transforms into a movie in your head, one where everything goes wrong and you are left powerless. Buddhism teaches that this mental storytelling, not reality itself, is the true source of suffering. Your mind imagines people judging you when no one is thinking about you at all. It imagines failure, even when nothing has gone wrong. It imagines worst-case scenarios, even though they rarely happen. It imagines danger in situations where you are completely safe. The mind does this because it is trying to protect you, but it ends up hurting you instead. It acts like an overprotective guardian, inventing threats so you will stay alert. But in doing so, it keeps you trapped in fear. You begin reacting emotionally to things that are not real: shadows, thoughts, possibilities, assumptions, and illusions. This is why the Buddha said, "Nothing can harm you as much as your own unguarded thoughts." The suffering comes not from the world, but from the story your mind attaches to the world. Imagine hearing a noise at night. The sound itself is harmless, just a vibration in the air. But your mind immediately tries to explain it. What if someone broke in? What if something bad is happening? Suddenly the heart races, the breath shortens, and adrenaline floods your body. You are experiencing fear based on a story, not reality. The same thing happens in your daily life. Your mind fills in missing information with negative assumptions. A short text message becomes, "They're upset with me." A slow response becomes, "They don't care about me." A small mistake becomes, "I'm a failure." These stories feel real because your emotions respond to them, but emotions do not prove truth, they only prove belief. Buddhism teaches you to look at these stories with awareness. Instead of blindly accepting them, you begin to question them. You ask yourself, is this happening right now, or is this just a thought? This single question has the power to dissolve anxiety instantly. Most of the time, you will realize the fear is not about the present moment. It is about a possibility your mind created. When you see this clearly, the emotional grip loosens. The pressure in your chest softens. The mind stops panicking because you have separated the story from the truth. You are no longer reacting to imagination, you are responding to reality. Your mind is like a storyteller sitting inside your head, constantly producing narratives about who you are, what might happen, and what everything means. But just because the storyteller speaks, it does not mean you must believe every word. When you begin observing your thoughts instead of unquestioningly following them, the storyteller loses its power. You start seeing the difference between a thought and a fact, between a fear and a reality, between a possibility and the truth. This awareness is one of the most liberating experiences you will ever have, because you realize that most of your suffering was self-created, not because you are weak, but because your mind was untrained. Once you learn this, you stop getting swept away by every story your mind creates. You stop assuming the worst. You stop believing that every thought is a warning. You stop reacting emotionally to things that are not happening. And you begin to live with clarity, strength, and emotional freedom. Because the truth is simple. Your mind will always create stories. That is its nature. But you get to choose which ones you believe. And the moment you stop believing the fearful ones, anxiety loses its foundation. It has nothing to stand on, nothing to attach to, nothing to grow from. That is when suffering fades. That is when peace returns. That is when you finally realize that your mind was never your enemy. It just needed guidance. 6. Detaching from thoughts gives you power over anxiety. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about the mind is the belief that every thought deserves attention. From the moment you wake up, your mind begins producing thoughts, automatically, thousands of them, flowing in every direction. Some are helpful, some are neutral, and some are rooted in fear, worry, or insecurity. Most people never question this stream of mental activity. They treat every thought as if it is important, meaningful, and true. But Buddhism teaches something profoundly freeing. You are not your thoughts, and you do not need to obey everything your mind creates. Thoughts are simply mental events, arising and disappearing like clouds across the sky. The problem begins when you cling to them, identify with them, or get pulled into their emotional gravity. When an anxious thought appears, it rarely appears softly, it arrives with pressure. It says, "This is serious, pay attention, something bad might happen." And because these thoughts feel urgent, you immediately react. Your heart speeds up, your breath becomes shallow, your muscles tighten. Suddenly, you are caught in a thought as if it were a real event happening in front of you. But the truth is, nothing has actually happened. You are reacting to a mental image, a prediction, a fragment of imagination. This is why anxiety feels overwhelming, because you have not learned to separate yourself from the thoughts your mind produces. You think you are the thought, instead of the witness observing the thought. To help people understand this, Buddhist teachers often use the river metaphor. Imagine sitting beside a flowing river. Leaves float by on the water, some large, some small, some beautiful, some rotten. If you reach into the river and grab every leaf, you will get dragged into the current and pulled underwater. But if you sit calmly on the riverbank and simply watch the leaves pass, the river cannot harm you. Your thoughts are the leaves, the river is your mind, and you are the one sitting beside it. The only time you suffer is when you grab the leaf. When you learn to watch it float, you remain free. This is the essence of detachment, not pushing thoughts away, not fighting them, not pretending they don't exist, but allowing them to come and allowing them to go without becoming emotionally attached. Detachment means observing without absorbing. It means giving a thought permission to exist without giving it permission to dominate you. Anxiety thrives on attachment. The moment you mentally grab a fearful thought, anxiety grows stronger, it gains momentum, it pulls you deeper. But when you watch the thought without judgment, without panic, without believing it is a command, the thought loses its power. You realize it is simply an event in the mind, not a truth about your life. Think about how many times your mind has told you something frightening that never came true. How many times it convinced you that disaster was coming when everything ended up being fine. How many times it made you feel unworthy, unsafe, or unprepared, even though none of those things were real. When you detach from thoughts, you begin to see this pattern clearly. You start to understand that the mind is doing what it has always done, creating stories, generating predictions, trying to protect you, even when there is nothing to protect you from. The moment you recognize this, you stop taking every thought so seriously. You stop letting fear make your decisions. You stop letting imaginary scenarios shape your real emotions. Detachment gives you back your strength because it reminds you of something important. You are the observer, not the content of the mind. The observer is always calm, always steady, always still like the sky watching the clouds. No matter how stormy the clouds become, the sky itself is untouched. Your awareness is the sky. Your thoughts are the clouds. Anxiety comes when you forget this and start believing you are the cloud. But once you return to the sky, once you return to your true observing awareness, no storm can control you anymore. Practicing detachment is not about escaping your mind. It is about creating space between you and your thoughts. Space that allows you to choose your response instead of being controlled by your reactions. This space is where wisdom grows, where calmness develops, where emotional freedom begins. And the more you practice watching your thoughts instead of absorbing them, the more natural it becomes to remain centered, even when your mind becomes noisy. Over time, your thoughts lose their power to intimidate you. They come and go like passing weather, while you remain grounded, steady, and aware. Detachment is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is the recognition that your inner peace is more powerful than any temporary thought. It is understanding that thoughts do not define you. They are simply passing visitors. You are the home they enter and leave. You are the one who decides whether they stay. And once you master the art of detachment, anxiety no longer finds a place to take root. You stop being dragged by the mind and start guiding the mind. You stop following fear and start following awareness. This is the moment your inner strength becomes unshakable. This is the moment nothing can control you anymore. 7. When you control your breath, you control your mind. One of the most overlooked truths about anxiety is that it does not begin in the mind alone. It begins in the breath. Long before the panic reaches your thoughts, your breath has already changed. It becomes shallow, tight, rapid, or uneven. The body senses this shift and sends signals of danger to the brain. The brain misinterprets these signals as proof that something is wrong, and within seconds, anxiety takes over. What feels like a mental attack is often just a physical reaction spiraling out of control. This is why Buddhism places such profound importance on the breath. The Buddha taught that the breath is the bridge between the body and the mind, the doorway to presence, and the most powerful tool for inner transformation. When you learn to control your breath, you interrupt anxiety at its roots. You send a message of safety to your nervous system, and the nervous system quiets the mind. Your breathing becomes the anchor that keeps you grounded when everything inside feels like it's collapsing. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm. The wind is wild, the sky is dark, and everything around you is shaking. That storm represents your anxious mind, chaotic, unpredictable, overwhelming. But deep beneath the storm is something calm, steady, unmovable. That is your breath. When you focus on the breath, you descend beneath the storm and enter a place that anxiety cannot touch. This is why monks practice breath awareness every day. It is not just a relaxation technique. It is a way of stabilizing the entire inner world. They understand that the breath is the first thing to change when the mind becomes frightened, and the first thing that must be restored if peace is to return. Most people breathe unconsciously. They react to stress with fast, shallow breathing, without ever realizing that they are feeding the fear with every inhale. But when you make the breath conscious, when you slow it down, deepen it, and hold it with awareness, you regain control over your emotions. The breath tells the brain, we're safe. The brain tells the body, relax. The body stops releasing stress hormones, and suddenly the anxious thoughts lose their fuel. They no longer feel urgent, overwhelming, or threatening. They drift in and out, but they no longer dominate your inner space. When this shift occurs, you begin to understand something extraordinary. Your breath has been your weapon all along. It has been your shield, your anchor, your quiet inner power. Think about how your body reacts when you panic. Your chest tightens. You feel like you can't breathe. Your thoughts race. Everything feels urgent. But what if, in that exact moment, instead of fighting the panic, you simply breathed? Not shallow breaths, not quick gasps, but slow, deep, intentional breaths. Your breath becomes a message to your entire being. I am here. I am in control. This feeling is not stronger than me. Every inhale fills the body with stability. Every exhale releases the unnecessary tension you've been carrying. And slowly, the storm begins to weaken. What felt unbearable becomes manageable. What felt suffocating becomes spacious. The breath turns panic into clarity and fear into presence. The Buddha often taught mindfulness using the breath because it brings you back to the present moment effortlessly. You cannot breathe in the future or breathe in the past. Breath exists only in the now, and anxiety cannot exist in the now. It loses its power when you are fully present. When you anchor your awareness to your breath, your mind stops running ahead into imagined dangers. It stops creating stories, assumptions, and catastrophic thoughts. It returns home to the only moment that is real, this one. And in this moment, there is no threat, there is no disaster. There is only breath, and breath is safe. You might not realize how deeply your breathing patterns shape your emotions. For example, when you breathe quickly, your heart speeds up. When your heart speeds up, your brain thinks something dangerous is happening. When your brain detects danger, it sends signals of fear, which intensifies anxiety. But this cycle can be reversed. When you slow your breath, your heart slows. When your heart slows, your brain receives the message that everything is okay. When the brain feels safe, it stops producing anxious thoughts. And just like that, the entire emotional landscape shifts. You create calmness from the inside out. Buddhist monks practice a technique called following the breath. They breathe in and say, internally, breathing in, I know I am breathing in. They breathe out and say, breathing out, I know I am breathing out. This simple practice creates a deep connection between the mind and the breath. It slows the mental noise, grounds the body, and brings clarity to the moment. There is no force, no pressure, no judgment, just awareness. And this awareness is powerful enough to dissolve anxiety like sunlight dissolving mist. Another teaching explains that the breath is like a gentle hand guiding a frightened child. Your anxious mind is that child, overwhelmed, reactive, scared. But when you breathe consciously, it is as if you are taking that inner child by the hand and saying, it's okay, I'm here, you're safe. The mind listens, it softens, it settles. Anxiety loses its authority because your breath becomes the leader, not your fear. People often underestimate the breath because it seems too simple. But simplicity is where the greatest power lies. You don't need complex methods to heal anxiety. You don't need to understand neuroscience or psychology. You don't need to fight your thoughts or escape them. You only need to return to the one tool you were born with, the tool that has kept you alive from your first moment on earth, your breath. It is your natural medicine, always available, always working, always ready to guide you back to peace. When you make breath control a daily practice, your relationship with anxiety changes completely. You stop feeling helpless. You stop feeling like your mind attacks you without warning. You stop believing that anxiety is stronger than you. Instead, you realize you have control over the one thing. Anxiety relies on the rhythm of your inner world. And once you control the rhythm, you control the emotion. Once you control the emotion, you control the mind. Once you control the mind, nothing can control you anymore. The breath teaches you something profound. Peace is not something you search for outside yourself. It is something you create through awareness. Every inhale is an invitation to return to yourself. Every exhale is an opportunity to let go of what no longer serves you. When you breathe consciously, you are not just calming the body, you are reshaping the mind, reclaiming your power, and teaching your entire being to respond to life with clarity rather than fear. With each breath, you become less reactive, more grounded, more aware, and more balanced. You stop drowning in thoughts. You stop fearing emotions. You stop running from yourself. You begin to trust your inner strength. You begin to discover a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, people, or certainty. A peace that is always available because it comes from within. This is the secret monks have known for centuries. Control the breath, and you control the mind. Control the mind, and you control your life. And once you reach this level of awareness, anxiety no longer rules you. It no longer overwhelms you. It becomes something you can face calmly, something you can breathe through, something you can dissolve with nothing more than the power of presence. This is the moment you reclaim your freedom. This is the moment you rise above fear. This is the moment you realize you were never powerless. You simply needed to learn how to breathe. 8. You become untouchable when you stop letting external conditions control your internal state. One of the deepest roots of anxiety is the belief that your peace depends on what is happening outside you. You think you can only relax when people behave a certain way, when life becomes predictable, when circumstances align perfectly, when every detail is under your control. But Buddhism teaches that this way of living guarantees endless suffering, because the external world will never, even for a single day, fully match your expectations. People will disappoint you. Situations will change. Plans will fall apart. Life will move in directions you cannot anticipate. If your peace is tied to the outside world, then your peace will always be fragile, unstable, and temporary. But when your inner world becomes your anchor, anxiety loses the power to shake you. Most people do not realize how much they hand over their emotional stability to outside forces. A single comment from someone can ruin their day. A small inconvenience can trigger stress. A change in someone's mood can create fear. A moment of uncertainty can send the mind spiraling. This happens because the mind has been trained to react to everything instead of observe. It believes that external triggers automatically determine internal feelings, and so it becomes a slave to conditions. But Buddhism teaches that the real source of suffering is not the event, it is the mind's reaction to the event. Two people can face the same situation and experience completely different emotions. The difference is not the situation, it is the mind that interprets it. Imagine walking outside and suddenly the weather shifts. Clouds darken, the wind becomes cold, and rain begins to fall. You cannot control the weather, but you can choose how you respond to it. You can get angry that it ruined your plans, or you can accept the rain as something natural, something that simply is. In the same way, the situations in your life are like weather patterns. They come, they go. They change without asking for your permission. When you expect the weather to behave the way you want, you create unnecessary suffering. When you accept it as part of life's flow, nothing disturbs your internal balance. The Buddha taught that peace comes from letting go of the illusion of control, because the more you try to control everything, the more anxious you become. Anxiety is, at its core, the fear of losing control. You try to control how others see you, how situations unfold, how conversations go, how outcomes turn out. But the truth is that you never had control over these things in the first place. The only thing you ever had control over, and the only thing you will ever need control over, is your response. Most people try to manage the external world instead of managing their internal world. But once you learn to master your inner state, the external world fades in power. What once triggered you now passes through you like a breeze. What once caused panic now barely disturbs the surface of your mind. You become emotionally untouchable, not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger. Think of your mind as a lake. When the wind blows, the surface becomes agitated, waves rise and fall, the water becomes disturbed. The wind represents external conditions, someone's behavior, a stressful situation, unexpected news, a moment of uncertainty. When your peace depends on the surface of the lake being calm, you will constantly be disappointed because the wind is always changing. But deep beneath the surface, the water is still, silent, unaffected, always at peace. That is the part of your mind Buddhism trains you to live from. When you sink your awareness beneath the surface, external conditions may continue to move, but they cannot touch your inner calm. Anxiety often arises because your mind is living too close to the surface. You react instantly to every shift, every comment, every unknown. You allow the world to shape your emotional state moment by moment. But when you learn to return to the deeper layers of awareness, anxiety fades naturally because you no longer treat everything as a threat. You understand that feelings are temporary, circumstances are temporary, and external triggers cannot harm the part of you that is awakened. You stop needing life to be perfect because you become stable within yourself. One of the most transformative Buddhist teachings is the concept of equanimity, the ability to remain balanced, centered, and calm regardless of what is happening around you. Equanimity does not mean you avoid emotions. It does not mean you detach from life or stop caring. It means you stop allowing every disturbance to become a storm. You stop believing every thought. You stop letting fear dictate your choices. You stop letting uncertainty become a source of panic. You develop the inner strength to remain steady even when situations are unpredictable. When equanimity becomes your practice, anxiety no longer finds a place to take root, because anxiety feeds on reactivity. A mind that does not react cannot be controlled. Another Buddhist teaching explains that the greatest power you have is the ability to choose your inner state. You may not choose what happens outside, but you choose how you meet it. When something stressful happens, you can say, "This is difficult, but I do not need to collapse." When someone speaks rudely, you can respond internally, "Their words do not define my peace." When uncertainty appears, you can say, "I do not need all the answers right now." These inner dialogues are not just thoughts, they are acts of reclaiming your emotional authority. Every time you choose inner calm over outer chaos, you strengthen the part of your mind that is free from fear. Most people live their lives backward. They wait for peace to come from the outside, waiting for money to arrive, waiting for people to behave better, waiting for life to stabilize, waiting for circumstances to become favorable. But Buddhism teaches that inner peace does not come from waiting for the world to change. It comes from changing your relationship to the world. When you realize that no external event has the power to disturb your inner world unless you give it permission, you step into a level of freedom that few people ever experience. You no longer fear the unknown because you trust your ability to remain centered no matter what arises. You no longer fear loss because you understand that your peace never depended on possessions. You no longer fear what people think because your worth is no longer tied to their opinions. This is how you become untouchable, not because life stops throwing challenges, but because challenges no longer shake you. Not because fear disappears, but because fear no longer controls your actions. Not because the mind stops producing anxious thoughts, but because those thoughts lose their influence. When your inner world becomes grounded like a mountain, external conditions become like passing clouds. They move, but they cannot move you. This lesson teaches you that true freedom does not come from controlling the outside world. True freedom comes from no longer being controlled by it. Once you understand this, anxiety loses its foundation. You rise into a level of strength that is not loud or aggressive, but calm, stable, and spiritually unbreakable. You walk through life with a sense of inner certainty that nothing outside you can disturb the peace inside you. And when you reach this point, Life no longer feels like a threat. It becomes something you experience fully, without fear, without obsession, without needing to control every detail. You finally understand what the Buddha meant when he said that peace comes from within. Once you stop giving the outside world power over your inner world, you become someone. Anxiety cannot touch someone who carries peace wherever they go, regardless of what is happening around them. 9. Your anxiety weakens the moment you stop trying to predict life and start trusting your inner path. One of the most silent but powerful causes of anxiety is the belief that you must constantly predict what will happen next. Your mind believes that if you can foresee every possible outcome, you can protect yourself from pain, disappointment, loss, embarrassment, or failure. So it begins scanning the future like a flashlight shining into the dark, searching for dangers that aren't even there. This habit feels natural because the mind thinks it is helping you by preparing for the worst. But what actually happens is that you become trapped in a cycle of overthinking, constant tension, and emotional exhaustion. Buddhism teaches that this endless prediction of the future is not wisdom, it is suffering disguised as safety. The more you try to foresee life, the more anxious you become, because you are trying to control something that was never meant to be controlled. The Buddha taught that uncertainty is not a flaw in life, it is life. Everything you see, everything you touch, every relationship, every opportunity, every feeling, every moment exists inside a continuous flow of change. Nothing stays still. Nothing remains predictable. Nothing unfolds according to your expectations. When you demand that life reveal itself before it happens, you place yourself in direct conflict with the nature of existence. This conflict becomes anxiety. The mind tries to solidify what is fluid. It tries to control what must flow. It tries to predict what is inherently unpredictable. This creates tension, fear, and constant mental resistance. Once you learn to stop fighting uncertainty and begin embracing it as a natural part of being alive, something miraculous occurs. Anxiety dissolves on its own. Most people believe that the more they think, the safer they become. But in reality, the more they think, the more disconnected they become from their inner wisdom. Thought is a tool, not a guide. Your inner path, the quiet, intuitive sense within you, is far wiser than the anxious predictions your mind creates. You have faced challenges before, and still you made it through. You have encountered unexpected situations and still found your way. You survived moments you once feared would break you. Life has never abandoned you, even when you felt lost. Yet the anxious mind forgets this truth. It believes everything depends on its ability to control the future. Buddhism teaches that wisdom comes not from predicting what will happen, but from fully trusting that whatever happens, you will know how to meet it. Think about how much fear comes from scenarios that never even unfold. You imagine a conversation going wrong, and then the conversation goes perfectly fine. You imagine someone rejecting you, and later they show kindness. You imagine failing at something, and instead you succeed. Your mind spends hours, days, even years living inside realities that never occur. This constant forecasting drains your emotional energy, steals your peace, and prevents you from being present. You begin to live in a world of imagined suffering instead of actual experience. Buddhism reveals a powerful truth. Most of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from the story your mind writes before life happens. The moment you stop trying to predict life, your anxiety begins to weaken. Your mind no longer spirals into endless what-if scenarios. You begin to understand that you do not need to know the ending of every situation in order to feel safe. You do not need guarantees. You do not need absolute certainty. What you need is trust. Trust in the present moment. Trust in your inner strength. Trust in your ability to adapt. Trust in your capacity to respond. Trust in the flow of life. When you switch from prediction to trust, your entire emotional world transforms. The constant tension in your chest softens. The noise in your mind quiets. The fear of the unknown becomes less intimidating because it no longer feels like a threat. Let go of the illusion that predicting everything will protect you. The truth is, prediction is what keeps you afraid. When you predict, you try to live life with clenched fists. When you trust, you allow your hands to open. You allow life to unfold without forcing it. You allow yourself to breathe. The Buddha taught that freedom comes not from knowing what will happen next, but from being grounded enough to face whatever comes. When your confidence becomes internal instead of external, unpredictability stops frightening you. You stop needing life to be a certain way. You stop needing others to behave predictably. You stop needing to feel in control of everything. Trust does not mean you ignore reality or pretend everything will always go perfectly. Trust means you stop assuming everything will go wrong. It means you give yourself permission to believe that you can handle what arises. It means you recognize that life has carried you this far and will continue to carry you forward. It means you begin to see uncertainty not as a threat, but as a space where possibilities exist. Without uncertainty, nothing new could enter your life. No growth, no change, no transformation, no opportunity. Anxiety tries to eliminate uncertainty, but in doing so, it eliminates life itself. Trust reconnects you with the natural flow of existence. Imagine standing at the edge of a river. The water is moving, unpredictable, and constantly shifting. You can either stand there, terrified of stepping in because you don't know how the currents will move, or you can step into the river and learn how to flow with it. Life is this river. Anxiety wants you to freeze on the shore. Trust invites you to move with the water. When you trust, you stop getting stuck in fear. You allow yourself to live. You allow yourself to feel. You allow yourself to move forward without needing all the answers. This is where true freedom begins. When you stop trying to predict every moment, your relationship with anxiety transforms. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the unknown, you feel empowered by your ability to meet the unknown. Instead of fearing change, you begin to embrace it. Instead of needing certainty, you become comfortable within uncertainty. This is what makes you mentally untouchable, not because life stops being unpredictable, but because unpredictability no longer breaks you. You begin to understand that peace is not the absence of uncertainty. Peace is the acceptance of uncertainty. You reclaim your power the moment you loosen your grip on the future. You reclaim your strength the moment you stop believing that safety must come from external control. You reclaim your sanity the moment you learn to trust your inner path more than your anxious predictions. You reclaim your freedom the moment you stop living in imagined disasters and return to the truth of where you actually are. The Buddha said, "Each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most." Anxiety wants you to live in tomorrow. Wisdom brings you back to today. When you choose today, when you choose presence over prediction, life stops being a source of fear and becomes something you can move through with confidence, openness, and awareness. This is how you rise above anxiety, not by controlling life, but by trusting yourself to walk through life with calmness, clarity, and inner balance. When the mind no longer chases the future, when the heart no longer trembles at the unknown, when your inner world no longer depends on external certainty, you become untouchable, you become grounded, you become free. And from that moment on, nothing outside you has the power to control the peace within you. 10. You heal anxiety the moment. You stop running from yourself and finally face your inner world with courage. One of the greatest misunderstandings about anxiety is the belief that you must escape it in order to feel better. People try to distract themselves, avoid their feelings, numb their emotions, suppress their thoughts, stay busy, or surround themselves with noise so they don't have to meet the quiet truth inside them. Anxiety becomes something they chase away instead of something they try to understand. But Buddhism teaches the exact opposite. The only way to free yourself from anxiety is to stop running from it and start turning toward your inner world with honesty and courage. As long as you avoid yourself, fear will control you. But the moment you stop running, the moment you sit with the feelings you've been avoiding, the fear begins to dissolve, because fear can only survive in the dark. Once you bring awareness to it, it loses its power. Think of your inner world as a house. When you run from anxiety, you are essentially running from the rooms inside your own house. You close the doors, lock them, and pretend those rooms do not exist. But the more you avoid them, the more frightening they become, because they remain unexplored, filled with shadows your mind creates. Buddhism teaches that the rooms you avoid are the ones that contain your healing. When you finally open the door and shine awareness into that space, you realize something profound. Nothing inside you was ever as dangerous as your imagination made it. You realize that the feelings you feared were simply emotions waiting to be acknowledged. You realize that the thoughts you avoided were simply thoughts, not truths. You realize that the pain you suppressed was simply asking for your attention, not your fear. Most people never pause long enough to understand what their anxiety is trying to say. They only react to the intensity without listening to the message. Anxiety often arises from ignored wounds, unmet needs, suppressed emotions, unresolved memories, or truths you haven't accepted. When you run from anxiety, you run from the very parts of you that need healing. When you turn toward anxiety with curiosity instead of fear, you give yourself the chance to understand the deeper layers of your mind. Anxiety becomes less of an enemy and more of a guide, a signal pointing you toward something inside that needs your presence. Facing your inner world does not mean forcing yourself into pain or drowning in emotion. It means sitting quietly, breathing deeply, and allowing your true feelings to surface without judgment. It means asking yourself questions like, what am I really afraid of? What emotion am I trying not to feel? What truth am I avoiding? What wound have I carried for too long? What part of me is asking to be seen? These questions open the door to self-understanding, and self-understanding dissolves fear. The Buddha taught that awareness is the greatest medicine for the mind. When you bring awareness to your inner experience, anxiety loses its mystery. You no longer react blindly. You begin to understand the patterns, the triggers, the stories, the wounds, and once you understand something, it no longer controls you. Avoidance strengthens anxiety. Awareness weakens it. When you avoid your feelings, you tell your mind that those feelings are dangerous. When you face your feelings, you teach your mind that those feelings are survivable. Slowly, the mind learns that it does not need to panic every time you experience discomfort. Discomfort becomes something you can sit with, breathe through, and allow. When you stop running, you stop reinforcing fear. When you lovingly turn inward, with compassion instead of avoidance, your anxiety realizes it no longer needs to scream to get your attention. It begins to soften, to loosen its grip, to release the tension it has held inside your body for years. Most people live disconnected from themselves. They know their routines, their responsibilities, their relationships, but they do not truly know their inner world. They have never explored their own thoughts with gentleness. They have never embraced their own emotions with forgiveness. They have never allowed themselves to simply sit and listen to what their heart is trying to say. When you finally give yourself this space, the space to meet yourself without judgment, healing begins in silence. The mind becomes less chaotic. The heart becomes less heavy. The body relaxes. The nervous system calms. Because for the first time, you are not abandoning yourself. You are not escaping yourself. You are not rejecting parts of you. You are welcoming the pieces of your inner world that you once feared. The Buddha taught that liberation begins when you stop seeing yourself as broken. Anxiety makes you believe there is something wrong with you. It convinces you that you are weak, fragile, or incapable. But when you face your inner world with courage, you begin to see your anxiety differently. You see that anxiety is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that your heart has been carrying too much for too long. You see that anxiety is not proof of failure. It is proof that you have been trying to survive without the tools you needed. You see that anxiety is not your identity. It is an emotional pattern that can be unlearned. When you stop running and start listening, you turn anxiety into a doorway into self-awareness, self-compassion, and emotional freedom. One of the most transformative practices in Buddhism is simply sitting with yourself. No distractions, no avoidance. Just sitting, breathing, and observing. At first, this feels uncomfortable because your mind is not used to being seen. It begins throwing thoughts, memories, fears, and emotions toward you. But the longer you sit, the more you realize that you are not those thoughts, not those memories, not those fears. You are the observer watching them. You are the awareness that holds them. You are the steady presence beneath the noise. This realization is life-changing because once you know you are the observer, nothing inside you can control you anymore. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, sensations appear and fade, but you remain. You are the stillness that anxiety cannot disturb. Facing your inner world does not mean everything will feel good immediately. Sometimes you will uncover sadness you never allowed yourself to feel. Sometimes you will meet fears you have avoided. Sometimes you will see patterns that need to change. But each time you face truth, you heal. Each time you sit with emotion, you soften it. Each time you bring awareness to fear, you weaken it. Healing is not a single moment. It is a continuous return to yourself. And with each return, your anxiety loses more and more power. There is great courage in choosing to face your inner world. Society teaches you to hide your feelings, to appear strong, to stay busy, to keep moving, to avoid discomfort. But Buddhism teaches that true strength is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to meet fear with awareness. True strength is the ability to sit with yourself without running away. True strength is choosing self-honesty over self-avoidance. When you stop running from your inner world, you stop feeling chased by anxiety. When you turn toward the places within you that hurt, you begin to heal the pain you once feared. When you meet yourself fully with compassion, patience, and openness, you discover a peace that has always been there beneath the surface. This is the final awakening. You realize that everything you were running from was simply a part of you longing to be understood. The moment you stop running is the moment you stop suffering. When you face your inner world, you reclaim control over your emotional life. Anxiety no longer dictates your choices. Fear no longer controls your thoughts. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to feel safe inside yourself again. You begin to walk through life with steady awareness, unshakable presence, and deep compassion for your own experience. And this is how healing truly happens, not by changing who you are, but by finally returning to who you have always been beneath anxiety. A calm, aware, grounded, compassionate, powerful being who only needed to stop running and start listening. When you do this, anxiety loses its grip. Peace becomes your natural state, and nothing, not even fear, can control you anymore. 11. You break the cycle of anxiety the moment you stop judging your feelings and start allowing yourself to simply be human. One of the most damaging habits that keeps anxiety alive is the constant judgment you place on yourself every time you feel something uncomfortable. Instead of experiencing an emotion naturally and letting it pass, you immediately label it. I shouldn't feel this. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I be stronger? These judgments might feel harmless, but they create an inner war that drains your energy, increases your fear, and strengthens your anxiety. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not come from the feeling itself. It comes from the resistance and judgment you attach to the feeling. A single emotion may last a few moments, but the judgment you add can last hours, days, or even years. When you stop judging your feelings and start allowing them to exist without shame or pressure, you break a cycle that has controlled you for far too long. Every human being experiences fear, sadness, uncertainty, anger, worry, confusion, and doubt. These emotions are not signs of weakness, they are signs of life. They show that you are a living, breathing, sensitive, conscious human being. Yet somewhere along the way, you learn to treat these emotions as flaws. Maybe you were taught not to cry, not to be vulnerable, not to show fear. Maybe you were taught that strength means being emotionless. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your feelings were dismissed, mocked, ignored, or misunderstood. Without realizing it, you started believing that certain emotions are bad, that your feelings make you less worthy, and that being human is something to be ashamed of. So now, every time you feel an emotion, you judge it, and that judgment becomes the root of your suffering. Buddhism invites you to take a radically different approach. It teaches that emotions are like weather patterns moving through the sky of your awareness. They come, they go, they shift, they transform. Happiness appears like sunlight. Sadness appears like rain. Anxiety appears like wind. None of these weather patterns define the sky. The sky remains vast, open, untouched, unchanged by the weather passing through it. In the same way, your emotions do not define your worth or your identity. They are simply experiences arising within the space of your consciousness. When you stop treating every emotional storm as a personal failure, you begin to realize that the storm is temporary, but the sky, your true self, remains steady and whole. Anxiety intensifies when you judge yourself, because judgment creates tension. Instead of letting the feeling move freely through your body, you tighten around it. You clench your jaw, stiffen your chest, hold your breath, and brace yourself against the emotion. Your mind becomes loud, telling you that you shouldn't feel this way, that something is wrong, that you must fight the feeling immediately. This physical and mental resistance traps the emotion inside you. The feeling tries to move, but you're holding it in place with fear and judgment, so it intensifies. It becomes heavier, louder, more overwhelming. The emotion did not become powerful. Your resistance made it powerful. But the moment you release judgment, the moment you allow the emotion to simply be present, the tension dissolves. Your breath deepens. Your body softens. The emotion begins to pass on its own. Think of how you treat a friend who is struggling. If someone you love feels anxious, you don't scream at them to stop feeling anxious. You don't tell them they're weak. You don't shame them for having emotions. You comfort them. You talk gently. You tell them it's okay to feel this way. You tell them they're human. But when you feel anxious, you treat yourself with none of that compassion. You become your own harshest critic. Buddhism teaches that healing begins when you learn to treat yourself with the same kindness you offer others. When you stop fighting your emotions and start listening to them with compassion, your inner world becomes a safer place. Anxiety fades when it no longer feels rejected or attacked. Allowing yourself to be human means recognizing that emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. They are signals pointing you towards something within you that needs attention, understanding, or care. Anxiety may be telling you that your mind is tired, that you need rest, that you've been holding too much, that you're living disconnected from your body, that you need boundaries, that you're afraid of repeating old wounds. Sadness may be telling you that something you value deeply has been lost or neglected. Anger may be telling you that something is violating your boundaries. When you judge these emotions, you silence the message. When you listen to them without fear, you gain wisdom about yourself. The Buddha taught that emotions are like visitors. They knock on your door, enter for a while, and then leave. If you welcome them with awareness, they stay briefly and quietly depart. If you slam the door, they keep knocking stronger and stronger. If you let them in but treat them with hostility, they linger and create chaos. But if you open the door with calmness, observe them, and let them exist without attachment or judgment, they eventually walk out peacefully. The problem is not the emotion itself, it is the way you relate to it. When you stop judging your feelings, you become free to experience them without drowning in them. You allow anxiety to arise without assuming it means danger. You allow sadness to flow without believing it means weakness. You allow fear to surface without treating it as a prophecy. You begin to see that emotions are waves, but you are the ocean. The waves may be intense, but they cannot uproot the ocean. They cannot define it. They cannot reduce its depth. The ocean remains whole. Your healing accelerates when you realize that your emotions only ask for one thing: permission to exist, permission to move through you, permission to be felt without shame, permission to be seen without judgment. When you grant yourself this permission, the inner pressure you've been carrying for years begins to release. You breathe more freely, you move more gently, you stop fearing your internal world. You realize that nothing within you is too big to handle, too dark to face, or too painful to feel. Everything becomes manageable when you stop resisting it. Many people think that accepting emotions means getting stuck in them, but the opposite is true. Emotions get stuck when you resist them. They flow when you accept them. Acceptance is not surrendering to discomfort forever. It is the doorway through which discomfort leaves. What stays trapped inside you are the emotions you refuse to feel. What passes through you are the emotions you allow to exist. Allowing yourself to be human also means letting go of the impossible expectations you place on yourself. You don't need to be calm all the time. You don't need to be strong every day. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to manage every situation perfectly. You don't need to impress anyone, including yourself. You don't need to hide your emotions to appear capable. True strength is not perfection, it is authenticity. It is the willingness to meet your inner experience without fear or shame. When you stop judging your feelings, anxiety weakens because it no longer becomes a moral failure. It becomes a temporary emotional experience. You no longer panic at your own fear. You no longer get angry at your own sadness. You no longer feel ashamed of your humanity. You begin to live with gentle awareness instead of harsh commentary. You begin to trust your capacity to feel without collapsing. You begin to see emotions as movements of energy rather than personal flaws. This shift is life-changing because the moment you stop resisting your inner world stops resisting you. The Buddha taught that the heart becomes free the moment you stop adding unnecessary suffering to your natural experiences. You may still feel anxiety, but you do not judge it, and so it passes. You may still feel sadness, but you do not shame yourself, and so it heals. You may still feel fear, but you do not treat it as truth, and so it softens. When judgment dissolves, emotions become lighter, and life becomes easier. By allowing yourself to be human, you break the deepest root of anxiety, the belief that you must be perfect in order to be worthy of peace. You begin to understand that peace is not something you earn. Peace is something you allow. Peace comes when you stop fighting what is already inside you. Peace comes when you accept your humanity fully. Peace comes when you stop running from yourself and finally become your own safe place. And once your inner world becomes a safe place, anxiety loses its greatest weapon, your fear of yourself. From that moment on, nothing inside you can control you, because you are no longer your own enemy. You are your own refuge. You become steady, compassionate, open, and emotionally free. You finally understand that being human is not a problem to solve. It is a journey to embrace. 12. You free yourself from anxiety when you stop living through the eyes of others and finally return to the truth of your own path. One of the most silent and destructive roots of anxiety is the constant habit of seeing yourself through the imagined opinions of others. Instead of living from your inner truth, you begin living from the outside inward. You walk through life worrying about how you appear, how you are judged, how people interpret your words, your choices, your emotions, and even your silence. Without realizing it, your entire identity becomes shaped by external approval. You stop asking yourself what you feel and start asking, what will they think? You stop listening to your intuition and start adjusting yourself to avoid criticism. You stop moving freely and begin moving cautiously, carefully, nervously, as if every step is being watched. This is the kind of life that slowly suffocates your spirit, steals your confidence, and feeds your anxiety with endless fear of being misunderstood, disliked, or rejected. Buddhism teaches that this is one of the greatest illusions of the human mind, the belief that your worth depends on the perception of others. When you rely on external validation to feel secure, you place your emotional well-being into hands that were never meant to hold it. People are unpredictable. People project their own wounds, insecurities, and misunderstandings onto the world. People change their opinions based on mood, assumptions, ignorance, or personal bias. If you tie your inner peace to something so unstable, your peace becomes unstable as well. Anxiety grows because your mind constantly monitors the world, trying to adjust yourself to fit expectations that are unclear, inconsistent, and often impossible. You begin to fear mistakes, imperfections, or any moment where you might fail to impress others. You become a prisoner of imaginary judgment, even when no one is thinking about you at all. The Buddha taught that trying to please everyone is the path to guaranteed suffering, because the more you seek approval, the more disconnected you become from your true self. To understand this deeply, imagine wearing a mask every day. At first, the mask feels light, almost helpful. It protects you from criticism. It hides the parts of you you're afraid to show. But the longer you wear it, the heavier it becomes. You begin to forget what your real face looks like. You start believing that you must keep the mask on at all costs or everything will fall apart. This is what happens when you build your life around pleasing others. You lose connection to your own truth. You lose trust in your own voice. You lose the ability to stand firm in who you are. And anxiety becomes the natural result, because the mask must be protected constantly. The fear of being exposed, disliked, or misjudged becomes overwhelming. The mind becomes hyper-alert, scanning endlessly for signs of rejection. This constant mental vigilance drains your energy and makes you feel unsafe even when nothing is wrong. But Buddhism teaches that the only approval that truly matters is the approval you give yourself. When you begin to live from your inner world instead of the expectations of the outer world, your anxiety begins to loosen. You no longer carry the weight of trying to satisfy everyone. You no longer feel threatened by every opinion. You no longer collapse under every misunderstanding. You begin to understand that what people think about you is a reflection of them, not you. Their judgments come from their own fears, their own upbringing, their own wounds, their own perspectives. You cannot control their mind, and you were never meant to. Your only responsibility is to walk your path with authenticity. When you do this, the external world loses its power over your inner world. Anxiety thrives on the fear of being rejected. But rejection is not the end of your life, it is simply a moment of misalignment. When someone does not understand you, it does not mean you are wrong. It means they are not the right mirror for your inner truth. When someone criticizes you, it does not decrease your worth. It reflects their own inner limitations. When someone distances themselves, it does not mean you are unlovable. It means your path is no longer aligned with their journey. The Buddha taught that everything that leaves your life creates space for something more aligned with your growth. When you stop fearing rejection, anxiety loses its grip because your inner stability no longer depends on anyone's acceptance. Living through the eyes of others also makes you forget something essential. Your life is your path, not a performance. You are not here to be perfect. You are not here to impress anyone. You are not here to fit an image created by society. You are here to grow, to evolve, to awaken, and to discover your deepest truth. When you constantly worry about how you appear, you miss the beauty of the present moment. You stop enjoying your experiences. You stop exploring your potential. You stop taking risks that could change your life. You become frozen by fear. But when you return to your own path, when you begin living from your heart, instead of the imagined expectations of the world, you become free. You begin to breathe again, fully and deeply, without fear of how your breath sounds to someone else. Buddhism teaches a powerful truth. Confidence is not a loud voice or a fearless attitude. Confidence is the quiet understanding that you are enough as you are. That your worth is innate, not earned. That you do not need to be liked by everyone in order to live peacefully. That your value does not decrease when someone fails to see it. Once you begin living from this truth, you stop shrinking yourself to fit into places that are too small for your spirit. You stop apologizing for being human. You stop judging yourself for every emotion. You stop hiding your authentic self behind layers of anxiety. You begin to trust your path, even when others do not understand it. The moment you stop living through the eyes of others, your anxiety begins to dissolve because the pressure to perform disappears. You no longer feel the need to anticipate every reaction, every opinion, every judgment. You stop rehearsing conversations in your mind. You stop overanalyzing every word you say. You stop fearing imperfections because you realize that perfection was never the goal, authenticity was. You begin to feel a peace that you have not felt in years, a peace that comes from aligning your life with your truth instead of the uncertain expectations of others. Imagine walking through the world carrying a lantern. When you depend on others for approval, your lantern is always dim because you fear drawing attention to yourself. But when you reclaim your power, the lantern glows brightly. It illuminates your path. It guides your steps. It reveals the direction meant for you. Others may not understand the light you carry, but they do not need to. The light is not for them. It is for you. And when you follow that light, your inner wisdom, you no longer fear the darkness around you. You no longer depend on the world to tell you who you are. You walk with clarity, with strength, with groundedness, and with a quiet confidence that melts anxiety from the inside out. When you stop living through the eyes of others, you return to your body. You return to your breath. You return to your intuition. You return to your truth. You stop abandoning yourself to gain approval that was never worth losing yourself for. This is the moment anxiety begins to unravel, because anxiety cannot control someone who is rooted in their own authenticity. You become untouchable not by hardening yourself, but by returning to your true nature, a nature that is peaceful, present, awake, and deeply aware. This is the ultimate teaching. You do not heal anxiety by becoming what the world wants you to be. You heal anxiety by finally becoming who you truly are. And once you do, nothing outside you has the power to disturb the peace within you ever again. 13. Anxiety loses its power the moment you learn to sit with silence and let your inner world speak without fear. One of the most overlooked roots of anxiety is the constant noise that fills your life, not just the noise around you, but the noise inside your mind. The endless rushing thoughts, the fears that whisper, the worries that echo, the doubts that loop, the stories that repeat themselves until they feel real. Most people move through life trying to drown out this inner noise. They surround themselves with distractions, busyness, entertainment, conversations, scrolling, notifications, anything to avoid hearing the truth that rises when everything else becomes quiet. But Buddhism teaches that noise is what feeds anxiety, and silence is what heals it. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of awareness. Silence is the space where the mind finally slows down, where emotions have room to breathe, where the truth of your inner world rises gently to the surface without forcing its way through chaos. The moment you learn to sit quietly with yourself, without distraction or avoidance, your anxiety begins to weaken, not because silence removes your fears, but because silence reveals that your fears were never as powerful as you imagined. Most people are afraid of silence because they believe silence will expose their inner chaos. They fear what they might feel or think if they stop moving, but avoidance only strengthens anxiety. Every emotion you avoid sits deeper inside your body. Every thought you suppress becomes louder in your unconscious. Every fear you escape grows stronger in the dark. Silence is not your enemy, silence is your teacher. When you sit in silence, your inner world begins to speak gently, at first, then clearly, then honestly. You begin to hear the truth behind your anxiety. You realize that the anxiety was not a monster chasing you, it was a message trying to reach you. But because you kept running, it kept chasing. When you finally stop and turn toward it in silence, you understand what it was saying all along. Silence slows the mind. It softens the heart. It relaxes the body. When you sit quietly, without forcing anything, your breath naturally deepens. Your nervous system begins to calm. Your thoughts become less aggressive. You begin to observe your mental patterns instead of reacting to them. You begin to see which fears are real and which are illusions. You begin to notice which emotions are present and which memories still need healing. Silence gives you the space to meet yourself deeply, honestly, gently. And this meeting is the beginning of liberation. The Buddha often retreated into silence because silence reveals what the world tries to hide. In silence, you see your attachments clearly. You see your ego's demands. You see your fears and your desires without filters. But you also see your strength, your courage, your clarity, your compassion, and your capacity to endure. Anxiety thrives on the belief that you cannot handle your inner experience. Silence disproves that belief. When you sit quietly, you realize that you can face your thoughts, you can face your emotions, you can face your inner world without collapsing. And once you learn this, anxiety loses its authority because its greatest weapon was always the illusion that you were too weak to face yourself. Silence also teaches you how to separate yourself from your thoughts. When you are constantly distracted, your thoughts feel like commands. They rise and you obey them instantly. But when you sit in stillness and simply observe, your relationship with thought changes. You begin to notice that thoughts come and go like clouds drifting across the sky. Some clouds are dark, some are light, some are dense, some are thin, but none of them are the sky itself. In the same way, your thoughts, even the anxious ones, are passing events. They arise from nowhere, stay briefly, and leave when you stop holding on to them. When you realize that thoughts are not permanent, you no longer fear them. You no longer cling to them. You no longer let them define you. You begin to live not from your thoughts, but from the awareness behind them. Another profound gift of silence is emotional digestion. Most anxiety comes from emotions that were never processed. The sadness you never cried out, the anger you never expressed, the fear you never admitted, the disappointment you never acknowledged, the grief you buried, the loneliness you ignored. These emotions do not disappear simply because you avoid them. They sit inside your body, tightening your chest, shortening your breath, creating tension in your muscles, and eventually manifesting as anxiety. Silence gives these emotions space to move, space to release, space to be felt and understood. When you allow yourself to feel gently in silence, your emotions finally complete their journey. They no longer need to scream through anxiety because they are being heard. Buddhism teaches that silence is the home of wisdom. When your mind becomes quiet, your intuition becomes louder. You begin to sense what decisions align with your path. You begin to recognize what relationships drain you and which ones nourish you. You begin to understand the direction your life wants to take. You begin to hear the voice of your deeper self, the part of you that has always known the way, long before anxiety clouded your vision. This inner voice does not shout, it whispers, and you can only hear it when the world becomes quiet. Once you learn to trust this inner guidance, you no longer feel lost. You no longer feel uncertain. You no longer feel overwhelmed by choices. Anxiety weakens because clarity replaces confusion. Silence also teaches you the art of letting go. When you sit quietly, memories may rise, regrets may surface, worries may appear. But instead of reacting, you watch them. You witness them without judgment, without attachment. You begin to see that holding on to these mental and emotional patterns is what causes suffering. When you allow them to rise and fall naturally, without interfering, your mind becomes lighter. The burdens you carried for years begin to dissolve. Letting go happens not through force, but through awareness. Silence gives you the space to release what no longer serves your peace. Most importantly, silence reconnects you with your true nature. Beneath the layers of fear, beneath the layers of thought, beneath the layers of emotion, there is a presence inside you that is untouched by anxiety. This presence is calm. This presence is steady. This presence is aware. This presence is your true self. Anxiety is like dust covering a mirror. Silence is the cloth that gently wipes the dust away. When you sit in silence, you begin to see your true reflection. Not the anxious version of you, but the awakened version, the grounded version, the peaceful version. You begin to remember who you were before fear became your companion. And once you reconnect with this inner presence, anxiety cannot uproot you anymore because you have found something deeper to stand on. When you learn to sit with silence, you also learn to sit with life. You no longer react compulsively. You no longer chase distractions. You no longer panic at uncertainty. You develop patience. You develop resilience. You develop inner stability. You learn to wait. You learn to observe. You learn to respond instead of react. This is how anxiety heals, not through suppression, not through escape, but through awareness born from silence. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is fullness. Silence is the place where the noise of the world fades and the truth of the soul rises. Silence is where you remember that you are not your fears, not your thoughts, not your worries, not your wounds. Silence is where you meet the version of yourself that anxiety tried to hide, the version that is whole, wise, and unshakably peaceful. And once you learn to sit with silence, anxiety loses the only power it ever had, the fear that you could not face yourself. In the stillness you realize something life-changing. What you were running from was never as frightening as the running itself. And once you stop running, once you sit, once you breathe, once you listen, you become free. Silence becomes your sanctuary. Awareness becomes your strength. Presence becomes your shield. Fear becomes something you understand rather than something you obey. And in that moment, anxiety loses its foundation entirely. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, can control a person who is no longer afraid of hearing their own soul speak. 14. Anxiety melts away the moment you realize you don't need to control everything. You only need to guide yourself through whatever comes. One of the deepest sources of anxiety, one that silently shapes your thoughts, emotions, and actions, is the desperate urge to control every aspect of life. You try to control outcomes, people's reactions, the future, uncertainties, conversations, timing, circumstances, and even your own emotions. This urge to control comes from fear. fear of being hurt, fear of being disappointed, fear of making mistakes, fear of losing something important, fear of being misunderstood, or fear of repeating wounds from the past. The mind believes that if it can control enough variables, it can prevent pain. But Buddhism teaches that this is a misunderstanding of life itself. The more you try to control everything, the more anxious you become, because control is an illusion the mind clings to in order to feel safe. True safety, true peace, true freedom do not come from controlling life. They come from learning how to guide yourself through life with awareness, presence, and wisdom. The Buddha taught that life is fluid. Nothing stays still for long. Everything changes: relationships, seasons, emotions, circumstances, opportunities, even your own thoughts and beliefs. Trying to control something that is constantly changing is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Anxiety thrives in this tightness. The more you tighten your grip on life, the more terrified you become of anything slipping through your fingers. You begin to monitor every situation, overthink every possibility, predict every outcome, and brace yourself for every possible loss. This constant vigilance drains your energy and overwhelms your nervous system. It convinces your mind that danger is everywhere, even when you are completely safe. You live in a state of chronic tension, not because life is dangerous, but because the mind believes it must carry the weight of life alone. But the truth is this: you cannot control life. You cannot control what others think, how they feel, what they choose, or how they behave. You cannot control the timing of events, the unfolding of circumstances, or the unpredictability of the future. You cannot control what people say or misunderstand about you. You cannot control every risk, every outcome, or every challenge. And you do not need to. Your power does not come from controlling life. It comes from guiding yourself through life with inner stability. Once you understand this, anxiety loses its grip. You realize that your job is not to control the storm. Your job is to steer your ship with awareness. Guiding yourself is very different from controlling life. When you try to control, you operate from fear. You resist reality. You cling to expectations. You panic at uncertainty. You fight against the natural flow of life. But when you guide yourself, you operate from wisdom. You remain open. You stay flexible. You stay grounded. You observe what is happening instead of forcing what you think should happen. You respond instead of react. You adjust instead of collapse. You move with life instead of against it. Think of a river. You cannot control the direction of the river, its speed, or its obstacles, but you can learn how to navigate it. You can guide your movement through the water, steer around rocks, stabilize yourself in turbulence, and follow the current instead of drowning in resistance. Life is this river. When you stop fighting its flow and instead learn how to move through it, peace replaces anxiety. Anxiety comes from believing that every uncertain moment is a threat. But uncertainty is not your enemy. Uncertainty is simply the part of life that hasn't unfolded yet. It is the place where growth, opportunity, and transformation live. When you try to control uncertainty, you turn it into fear. But when you guide yourself through uncertainty, you turn it into wisdom. You learn to trust your ability to handle whatever arises. You learn that you don't need to know the future to feel safe. You learn that you have survived every past uncertainty, and you will survive every future one as well. The urge to control also grows from a misunderstanding of your own strength. You believe that if you let go even a little, everything will fall apart. You believe you are the only one holding your world together. But Buddhism teaches that life does not break when you release control, you break when you refuse to. The moment you loosen your grip, even slightly, you feel a sense of relief. Your breath deepens, your shoulders soften, your mind slows. You begin to realize that the world continues even when you stop monitoring it. People continue to be themselves regardless of what you do. Life continues to unfold whether you worry about it or not. You do not need to carry everything. When you begin to trust life instead of trying to control it, your relationship with anxiety transforms. You stop catastrophizing every possibility. You stop assuming the worst. You stop overthinking every detail. You stop manipulating situations to avoid discomfort. You stop believing that fear is a sign you are unprepared. Instead, you learn to meet life with calm adaptability. You realize that your mind is strong enough to handle change. Your heart is strong enough to handle loss. Your spirit is strong enough to handle uncertainty. And your awareness is strong enough to guide you moment by moment. The Buddha taught that the greatest suffering comes from resistance, not from life itself. When you resist life, anxiety grows. When you accept life, anxiety dissolves. Acceptance is not passive surrender. Acceptance is clarity. Acceptance means seeing things as they are, instead of forcing them into your expectations. Acceptance means meeting each moment with presence instead of fear. Acceptance means guiding yourself through life instead of trying to control its direction. Consider the moments when anxiety hits hardest. It usually happens when life does not match your mental script. Someone behaves differently than you hoped. A situation changes unexpectedly. Your emotions rise without warning, or something unfolds in a way you cannot predict. The mind panics because reality broke the illusion of control. But when you stop expecting life to follow your script, these moments no longer feel like attacks. They feel like part of the natural flow. When you release the script entirely, you begin to live in true presence. You stop trying to manipulate life and start experiencing life. Guiding yourself through life means cultivating qualities like patience, awareness, resilience, and inner trust. Patience teaches you that not everything needs to happen immediately. Awareness teaches you to see things clearly rather than through the lens of fear. Resilience teaches you that you can survive discomfort. And inner trust teaches you that you can navigate challenges without controlling them. Once you develop these qualities, anxiety begins to melt away. You no longer feel trapped by what you cannot control. You no longer spiral when things change. You no longer believe that uncertainty means danger. You begin to walk through life with a calm presence, knowing that you are capable of handling both the expected and the unexpected. You begin to trust that life supports your growth even when it disrupts your plans. And you begin to understand that peace is not found in controlling the world, it is found in controlling how you move through the world. You break free from anxiety the moment you accept that control is not the source of safety. Awareness is, presence is, wisdom is, breath is, trust is. These inner qualities are far more powerful than the illusion of control. They guide you in every moment, regardless of circumstances. When you let go of the need to control everything, you discover a deeper truth. You were never meant to control life. You were meant to flow with it. You were never meant to predict every outcome. You were meant to meet each moment with clarity. You were never meant to hold everything tightly. You were meant to hold yourself gently. And once you understand this, anxiety no longer dominates your inner world. It no longer dictates your choices. It no longer clouds your thinking or constricts your breath. You become soft in your body, open in your mind, steady in your heart, and peaceful in your spirit. Life continues to change, but you no longer fear the changes. You guide yourself through them. This is the true freedom Buddhism teaches. Not freedom from life, but freedom in life. Not freedom from uncertainty, but freedom from fearing uncertainty. Not freedom from emotions, but freedom from being controlled by them. And once you reach this understanding, you realize something extraordinary. You don't need to control anything outside you. You only need to guide the one thing that has always been within your reach, yourself. 15. Anxiety disappears the moment you stop fighting reality and start flowing with life exactly as it is. Anxiety is not only born from fear, uncertainty, or past wounds, one of its greatest sources is the constant inner conflict between how you believe life should be and how life actually is. You hold a picture in your mind of how your plans should unfold, how people should act, how your emotions should behave, how circumstances should progress, and how your path should look. The moment life deviates from that picture, even slightly, anxiety rises. It rises because the mind resists what is happening. It resists the present moment. It resists reality. Buddhism teaches that almost all human suffering comes from resisting existence rather than flowing with it. The tighter your expectations, the more fragile your peace becomes. The more you argue with life, the more anxious your inner world grows. But the moment you stop fighting reality, the moment you stop thinking the present moment is wrong, unfair, or unacceptable, something extraordinary happens. Your anxiety begins to fade because you're no longer at war with the way things are. To understand this deeply, imagine a tree growing on the side of a mountain. It does not receive perfect sunlight. Its roots grow in difficult soil. The wind hits it constantly. The ground beneath it is uneven. Should this tree fight reality? Should it refuse to grow unless life becomes easier? Should it complain, collapse, or break at the first sign of hardship? No, the tree adapts. It bends with the wind. It sends its roots where they can find nourishment. It twists, stretches, and evolves into a shape that fits its environment. And because it does not resist reality, it thrives in a place that seems impossible. This is the resilience life teaches. The ability to grow, not despite reality, but with it. Human anxiety arises when you demand that life gives you straight roads, predictable weather, smooth paths, and perfect circumstances. But life is not built that way. Life is dynamic. Life is uncontrollable. Life is always shifting. When you cling to rigid expectations, you break. When you soften, you survive. When you flow, you grow. Anxiety intensifies each time you say internally, "This should not be happening." That one thought is enough to ignite emotional panic. It creates separation between you and the present moment. It tells your mind that something is wrong simply because life did not match your plan. But the present moment is not wrong, it is simply different. It is simply unfolding in a way that invites growth, clarity, patience, humility, strength, or a deeper understanding. When you stop labeling reality as a mistake, you stop feeding anxiety with resistance. You stop creating a mental storm around a situation that, in truth, might not be a threat at all. The Buddha taught that life becomes peaceful, not when challenges disappear, but when your resistance disappears. What you resist becomes heavier. What you accept becomes lighter. Acceptance does not mean you like every situation. It does not mean you approve of everything that happens. It simply means you stop wasting your energy denying what is already here. You meet the moment instead of fighting it. You breathe into it instead of rejecting it. The moment you accept the reality in front of you, your inner world becomes spacious. Your breath deepens, your muscles relax, your mind stops fighting shadows. You begin to see clearly, and clarity destroys fear. Anxiety cannot survive in a mind that sees things as they truly are. Most anxiety is not caused by the situation itself, but by the story your mind tells about the situation. When reality shifts unexpectedly, the mind immediately begins writing dramatic scripts. This will ruin everything. I won't be able to handle this. Why is this happening to me? This means something terrible is coming. These thoughts are not truth, they are reactions. They are attempts to resist discomfort. But when you pause, breathe, and look directly at what is happening, you often discover that the situation is not nearly as dangerous as your thoughts claimed. You begin to realize that the mind is terrified not of life, but of losing control. And once you accept that control was never the goal, anxiety has nothing left to hold on to. Acceptance is one of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. Many people think acceptance means passive submission, giving up, or allowing things to stay as they are forever. But acceptance is not about staying stuck, it is about seeing clearly. Acceptance gives you the mental clarity needed to respond wisely. When you accept reality, you do not freeze, you awaken. You stop wasting energy fighting the present moment, and you start using your energy to understand it, navigate it, and transform it where transformation is possible. Acceptance is the foundation of intelligent action. Without acceptance, your reactions are clouded by fear and resistance. With acceptance, your actions become aligned with reality instead of against it. Imagine walking through a river with a strong current. If you stiffen your body, resist the water, and push against the flow, you will exhaust yourself quickly. The current will overpower you. You may fall. But if you move with the water, adjusting your steps, shifting your balance, matching your body to the flow, suddenly the current becomes manageable. You begin to navigate rather than fight. This is the difference between resisting reality and flowing with it. Anxiety is the stiffness. Peace is the flexibility. The river is life. The moment you move with the river instead of against it, your entire experience shifts. Buddhism teaches that attachment to expectations is one of the greatest sources of suffering. You imagine the perfect timing for things to happen. You imagine how people should behave. You imagine how your life should unfold. When reality does not match these inner images, anxiety emerges. But the problem is not reality. The problem is your attachment to the way you wished reality would be. When you let go of rigid expectations, you regain inner stability. You stop punishing yourself for not controlling the uncontrollable. You stop fearing the natural flow of life. You begin to adapt instead of panic. You begin to trust instead of resist. When you accept reality as it is, you begin to notice something profound. Life has never actually harmed you as much as your resistance to life has. You survived every challenge that came your way. You grew through every difficulty. You learned from every moment of pain. What hurt you most was not the reality itself, but the fear, worry, judgment, and resistance you added to it. Once you realize this, anxiety begins to shrink. You begin to see that life does not need to be controlled in order for you to be safe. You begin to understand that your strength comes not from forcing life to obey your expectations, but from learning how to meet reality calmly, openly, and with wisdom. Acceptance also teaches you the beauty of surrender, not surrendering your power, but surrendering your resistance. Surrendering the idea that you must manage everything perfectly. Surrendering the belief that you must never experience discomfort. Surrendering the illusion that control equals safety. When you surrender resistance, you step into a state of inner peace that does not depend on circumstances. You become like a tree that bends with the wind rather than snapping in the storm. When you practice flowing with life, anxiety begins to transform into trust. Trust in your ability to adapt. Trust in the wisdom of the present moment. Trust in your inner resilience. Trust in the process of life itself. You stop needing life to be predictable because you know you can navigate whatever arises. You stop fearing changes because you know changes bring growth. You stop panicking when plans shift because you understand that plans shifting is part of life's design. Buddhism teaches that when you flow with life instead of fighting it, you begin to see opportunities where before you only saw obstacles. You begin to recognize lessons where before you only saw losses. You begin to understand that every moment, even the difficult ones, carries something valuable for your evolution. This shift destroys anxiety from its core, because anxiety cannot survive in a mind that no longer fears reality. The ultimate truth is this: peace is not found in controlling life, but in cooperating with it. You do not need to force life to fit your expectations. You only need to allow life to unfold, while guiding yourself with awareness, patience, and courage. When you accept reality fully, the present moment becomes your ally instead of your enemy. And when the present moment becomes your ally, nothing can disturb your peace. This is when anxiety disappears. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped resisting the life you are actually living. Not because everything became predictable, but because you learned how to meet the unpredictable with calmness. Not because fear vanished, but because fear no longer controls you. When you stop fighting reality and start flowing with it, you become someone life cannot break. You become adaptable, grounded, flexible, awake, and deeply at peace. You understand that you do not need to bend the world to find calmness. You only need to bend your resistance. Once you learn this, you carry peace inside you everywhere you go, and nothing, absolutely nothing, can control you anymore. As you reach the end of these teachings, take a moment to realize how far you have already traveled. Anxiety once felt like a permanent part of your identity, something you believed you were stuck with, something that controlled you, something that dictated the rhythm of your days and the limits of your life. But now, something inside you has shifted. You have learned that anxiety is not your identity. It is simply a reaction. You have learned that thoughts are not commands. They are clouds passing through the vast sky of your awareness. You have learned that emotions are not weaknesses. They are messengers. You have learned that silence is not emptiness. It is healing. You have learned that the need for control was the source of your fear, not the source of your safety. And most importantly, you have learned that peace was never something outside of you. It was something waiting inside you, hidden beneath layers of resistance, fear, stories, expectations, and unprocessed emotions. The Buddha taught that liberation is not found in changing the world, but in understanding the mind. Today, you have begun that understanding. You have learned how to sit with yourself, how to breathe into the present moment, how to return to your body, how to witness your thoughts without drowning in them, how to allow your emotions without judging them, how to release the illusion of control, and how to accept life as it is, instead of clinging to how you wish it would be. These may seem like simple lessons, but in truth, they are transformations of the deepest kind. They are rewiring your relationship with your inner world. They are rebuilding your connection with your true nature. They are teaching you how to walk through life without carrying the heavy armor of fear. Every moment of awareness you've practiced is a moment where anxiety lost power. Every breath you took consciously is a breath where fear loosened its grip. Every emotion you allowed to move through you without judgment is a moment where healing began. These are not small victories. These are profound shifts. They are the beginnings of a new relationship with yourself, one grounded in compassion, patience, presence, and inner stability. You no longer run from your inner world. You meet it. You no longer fight your thoughts. You observe them. You no longer drown in your emotions. You breathe through them. You no longer treat discomfort as danger. You treat it as part of the human experience. You no longer search for safety in controlling the world. You build safety inside your own awareness. The truth is this: you are no longer the same person who started this journey. You are becoming someone calmer, someone clearer, someone more aware, someone less reactive, someone more grounded, someone who understands life instead of fearing it. You are becoming someone who can hear their own inner wisdom, even in moments of chaos. Someone who can sit with silence without running. Someone who can accept uncertainty without collapsing. Someone who can feel emotions without believing they are broken. Someone who can face reality without resistance. Someone who can trust themselves to handle whatever comes. Anxiety does not disappear in a single moment, but it weakens every time you choose. Presence over panic, acceptance over resistance, awareness over avoidance, truth over fear, and compassion over judgment. Every day you practice these teachings, Even for a few minutes, you are training your mind to return to peace. You are teaching your nervous system that it is safe to relax. You are teaching your heart that it no longer needs to carry years of suppressed emotion. You are teaching your breath to flow again. You are teaching your awareness to expand. And this expansion is your liberation. Your mind is learning that it does not need to create storms to feel prepared. Your heart is learning that it does not need to hide to feel protected. Your spirit is learning that it does not need to shrink to feel accepted. You are remembering something sacred. You were never meant to live in fear. You were meant to live awake. And now you are awakening. This journey is not about eliminating anxiety. It is about transforming your relationship with yourself. It is about discovering the strength that was always inside you, hidden beneath layers of survival patterns. It is about remembering that peace is your natural state, not something you beg for from the world. It is about learning that nothing outside you has the power to control your inner world unless you give it permission. So as you walk forward, carry this truth with you. You are not a prisoner of your thoughts. You are not defined by your reactions. You are not controlled by your fears. You are the awareness that sees all these things. You are the one who breathes beneath the storm. You are the calm beneath the noise. You are the sky, not the weather. And as long as you remember this, anxiety cannot dominate you anymore. Because the moment awareness rises, fear falls. The moment acceptance enters, suffering ends. The moment you stop fighting life, peace appears. The moment you stop abandoning yourself, healing begins. You are learning how to live again, not through fear, not through tension, not through control, but through presence, wisdom, and deep self-understanding. This is how you return to yourself. This is how you reclaim your peace. This is how you become untouchable. And from this moment onward, nothing can control you anymore. Nothing can break you the way it once did. Nothing can make you afraid of your own mind. You are free. Slowly, gently, steadily, you are becoming free.